Bibles along with me to the Gospel according to Luke, and we're in chapter 22 this morning. And just as we'd spent, kind of somewhat to my surprise, but when I look back, we'd spent 6 weeks seated with Jesus at the supper table, there in the upper room. And in some ways, leaving that place, that upper room was kind of like coming down from heaven. Now, Jesus always said, don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. I'm going to prepare a place for you. But the next place they went was more like hell in so many ways, a place of stress and darkness and loneliness. And it's the Garden of Gethsemane. And looking back, we've actually been 6 weeks there alone with Jesus in the garden. And today we move on. And it's not like moving on from heaven in the upper room. In some ways, it's moving out of a place that I've really got a lot out of this study. But the place itself, the Garden of Gethsemane, that garden of pressure, that place of loneliness, the one where even your closest friends fail you, I'm ready to leave that behind. But even when we move forward in a study, life itself, we find that we're back in those places of difficulty. And the way that Jesus leads us out of here as we come to this last study in this section, it's the way that we can get out. For every temptation, for every trouble, we're told that it's common that we have these temptations, but there's always a way of escape. There's always a way out. Always learning to follow Jesus and doing as he did. And so here, the last of 6 studies in the Garden of Gethsemane, I want to just look at the whole section, read it. It's about 8, 10, 12 verses here in Luke. Read the section, then we'll focus on the final words because that's the part we haven't looked at yet. But going back to verse 39, it says that Jesus came out from the upper room and he proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane, we know it as. And the disciples followed him there to that garden. And when he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." He said that to all of the 11. And then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down, and he began to pray, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but your will be done." And we saw that was prayed. Luke doesn't say this, but we know that 3 times he prayed this. And Mark gives the words the greatest passion. You can almost feel his pain when he said, "Abba, Papa, Daddy, all things are possible for you. Take this cup from me." And so repeatedly he would pray that and then go back to check on the 3 that he'd invited to come a little further, the ones that he'd invested the most in, Peter, James, and John. And they would be sleeping from sorrow, and he would warn them over and over again, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And so all of that we've seen, all of that's being played out. And then it says, verse 41, that he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray. He did it 3 times. I've done it twice now. "Father, if you're willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but thine be done." And then, verse 43, an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. And being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow. And that's a great contrast for learning. He rose from prayer, they slept, they sunk down from sorrow. A sad contrast, what he did versus what they did. And then he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation." And while he was still speaking, behold, a multitude came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was preceding them, and he approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around him saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And a certain one of them, Peter, struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered. He said, "Enough, stop. Allow this." He spoke in words kind of like I'm stuttering along here, not easy to translate, but again, a lot of emotion. And he's saying, "At least allow this. Let me do this." And he touched that man's ear, and he healed them. And so in that scene up to this point, along comes Judas. We looked at the proverb that says that the kisses of an enemy are deceitful, not worth focusing on, not worth paying a lot of attention to. It's deceptive. It's the wounds of a friend that are faithful. And that's always our focus. Jesus, our friend, and the way he was wounded by us and for us. And that's always the thing that we look at because, as Isaiah said, by his wounds we are healed. And here he is, rather than being wounded by the fact that he received that Judas kiss, he knew that Judas isn't the enemy. There is a prince of darkness, there is something at work here, but Jesus would have healed Judas if Judas was willing. If Jesus would have received the healing, Jesus would have healed him as readily as the ear of the high priest, or as well as Peter or anyone else who wants the healing. And we saw last week, we got thus far, and we saw that those wounds that will heal. But it's the wounds that keep on wounding. It's the ones in which we won't follow Jesus. That's where we stay wounded. That's where we remain in that place of darkness and pressure and loneliness. And so all that he says, all that he does is the example of how we can get out of similar places. None of us will ever go as deep. None of us will ever be put under as much pressure or so alone or in so much darkness as Jesus was there in Gethsemane. But all of us, at least a little bit, we go through these things, and this is the way that we go through it. Jesus takes us out of this Garden of Gethsemane. You get out the way he went out. You lay down the sword. You take up the cross. You follow him. Now, in these studies, I've been pointing out to you that in many ways this is similar to the first garden. In many ways, it's the antithesis of the first garden, the Garden of Eden. But what happened with the first man, the first Adam, Jesus is now undoing and completing and fulfilling in so many ways. And Eden, of course, was a garden of pleasure. Whenever I think of Eden, I think, wouldn't it have been, what a bummer we blew it. Eden was a garden of pleasure. And there still is so much pleasure in a garden. But Gethsemane is a garden of pressure. It's that place, the word Gethsemane, it's the wine press. It's the place where again, Jesus sweating, as it were, great drops of blood. A little picture of what we can go through. And so there in that place, he's succeeding where Adam failed. You know from the first story that whatever specifically happened, we failed. Our first father, Adam, he failed in the garden, and he was driven out of that garden. And there was the sword-packing angel that blocked the way, that you can't come back, there's no going home. Remember that picture? It says that a cherubim with a flaming sword covering all directions was there guarding the way to the tree of life. And here's Jesus now doing really just the opposite, coming into this garden of pressure, coming into this garden of Gethsemane. And here the angel isn't blocking the way. The angel comes alongside to support Jesus in what he's doing. And here the sword isn't preventing something. The sword is actually put away. The sword is sheathed. And the tree of life, far from being blocked, the tree of life is transplanted from Eden to Calvary. The tree of life is actually not kept in a secret garden, like who knows how to get back home, how to get to the fountain of youth, how to get to the tree of life. Far from it. The tree of life has been put on a high hill, a place where all men can see it. And incredible as it may seem, and I may have put you all to sleep with my nice little monologue here, but if you think about it, as incredible as it may seem, the cross of death is the tree of life. And that barren thing, made of wood, but far from being a tree that can bear fruit, that ugly thing that he carried was actually taking the tree of life and transplanting it on a high place where all men might see, where anyone who wants to can be healed. By his wounds, we are healed. And really, Gethsemane is a turning point. Jesus, with the sweat and the prayer and that hard, when he leaves here, he goes forth with joy. We're told that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He despised the shame. Even though he walks out of this garden, it says that he was shackled. Not that anyone could or needed to, but he actually submitted to being bound, to being handcuffed, so to speak. But he walks out of that garden completely free, and the light of joy goes before him. And he takes that cross, and in fact, he knows this is a tree of life. And he walks forward saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. But we can learn what he was doing. He takes that tree of life and he makes it accessible. He makes it available to all. So as he leaves, as we take this last study looking at how he leaves, I just encourage you. You can leave a lot of stuff behind too. Things that you think might hold you down, things that you might think you deserve, things that you might think should be your lot and you belong there. But no, you belong with Jesus. If you want to be healed, if you want to walk with Jesus, you can walk. Doesn't matter how lame you've been, you can walk. You can take the next step. You can follow Jesus. How he loves you, how he cares for you. By his wounds, we are healed. And so we follow him. He bore our burdens. Again, going back to the first garden and the curse, or what we call a curse. Remember, it was Jesus who was with Adam in that first garden. He's the Logos. He's the one. He's the God who walked with Adam in the cool of the garden. It was the one we know as Jesus who came and spoke to Adam and said, after what you've done, from the dust you've come, to the dust you'll return, and all the days of your life you'll be dealing with dust. You'll be laboring, you'll be toiling in the soil. You'll be laboring, toiling in the dust. And you're going to find there's a lot of pain, a lot of toil, a lot of sweat. And coming forth is thorns and thistles, and doesn't that sound promising? But he says that's what came about because you in some ways turned your back on me. In some ways you walked away. You wouldn't listen. You wouldn't trust. That's what comes of it. But in compassion, Jesus said that to Adam. And now he's doing just the opposite. He's bearing the pain. He's bearing the toil. He sweats the great drops of blood. He takes the thorns and allows it to be turned into his crown. And he carries that tree of life. So he takes it all on so that he can take it all away. And all of this is something that if you can picture it in your heart, it will help you in very practical ways. When you find yourself stuck, when you find yourself feeling alone, when you find yourself believing that the darkness is where you belong, and you're going to belong in that place because that's where you belong. No. He calls us. And I hope you've heard, in a sense, a very personal call. He calls by name. He cares for you. There's not a single one of you that he doesn't love and care for. And he calls you saying, come. Let's get out of this garden of pressure. Let's get back to Eden. Let's get back to paradise. The Father's house, there's many dwelling places. I'm going to prepare a place for you. That's the idea. Follow him because he's trustworthy. If there's one man in the world throughout history who I could trust, it's Jesus. Trust the fact that he loves you. He cares for you. In every temptation, every place of pressure, every garden of Gethsemane, every time when you feel like you're so alone, your friends have failed you, just do what Jesus did. Remember how he gets out, follow him, put down the sword, take up the cross, quit wounding with your wounds, start healing the wounds of others. Do the things that he did. First of all, like we've seen, and as we read it through one more time, it comes out even clearer. Pray as he prayed. When he was telling his disciples, first the 11 and then repeatedly to Peter, when he kept saying, pray that you may not enter into temptation, it wasn't for his sake. For his sake, he said, could you stay awake and pray? Because my soul is distressed to the point of death. He, as a man, was feeling that loneliness and wanting not an angel to help, but he wanted human companionship. They failed in that. Jesus didn't hold it against them. Jesus didn't sit there and go, man, these guys, I have invested so much. Again, the attitude was always there, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And he said to them, your spirits are willing. It's just your flesh. Your flesh is weak. But where Jesus found his rest, his refreshment, was in the prayers that he himself prayed. I mean, yeah, you look at his body sweating great drops of blood. That's not a great marketing tool for prayer. You too can sweat blood. You can pray. Isn't prayer wonderful? Now, life will make you sweat blood sometimes. The pressures you're under can do it to you. Prayer is a place of rest. And Jesus found his rest. Jesus found his refreshment in those repeated times of prayer. Too bad the disciples didn't. They sunk in sorrow. They slept in sorrow. It wasn't the kind of sleep that refreshes you. It's the kind of sleep of depression. You wake up and you're even less ready to do what you need to do. They slept in sorrow. He rose from prayer. He rested in prayer. And he kept encouraging, as he still is encouraging us, find your rest. Find your refreshment there with your Father as Jesus did. Jesus wasn't coming up against a hard-nosed father, hard-headed, oh, he's going to have his way, so better not even try to fight him. He always knew, I and the Father are one. I can't even figure out how in the world this happened, and yet, in a sense, there was this, as a human, there's limitation, and as a man, he was conflicted, and there was this sense in which I don't want to ever have to, not the pain and suffering of death, but somehow being separated as he would be there on the cross. He dreaded that. What perfect human would not dread what he was dreading? And so, of course, he said, take this from me. But when he kept falling back on that last line, when he kept falling back and saying, but not what I want, what you want. That wasn't some heroic phrase like hold your breath and how brave you are, take the dive, what you want, as though he were some hard-nosed father. That's where he kept falling back on the Father's love. That's where he kept falling back on the fact that, but your will, Father, your will is wonderful. He knew that. God help us that we would know that we would stop seeing the Father as the hard-nosed one, the one that's got an anger problem. Again, Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. To understand that the Father is so kind, so loving, in him there is no darkness at all. And to say to him what you want is to say, I want what is most wonderful. What in the end will make me most happy? What in the end, I can't even as a man begin to conceive what that might be, and I have this and I have that, but you know what? I'm going to let it go because your will be done. Your will be done when you know who it is you're saying that to. When you're saying that to the Father, then his will, just resting in his will, is really the best place you can ever rest. Better than any bed that we can make ourselves, better than any resting place we can imagine, some retirement center, some sort of, this is the bed I've made, some hospital bed, or some go back to the cradle, or marriage bed, or Tempur-Pedic bed, or sleep number, whatever bed you might make up in your mind, here I can rest. No, maybe not. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe you won't rest there. Not my will, but thy will be done. To fall back on the Father's will is to fall back on the feather bed, the resting bed, the place where I'm sweating this, I'm struggling with this, I'm having a hard time, but I keep falling back. And in those last words, every time he said that wasn't the most heroic thing he said, not my will, but thine be done, I'm going to face the dragon. No, I'm facing the Father. Your will be done. And in repeatedly falling back on that, repeatedly finding rest there, that's what enabled him to then rise from prayer. He was refreshed in those prayers. He was able to get through a terrible time. And in the Father's will, in the Father's love, in the Father's compassion, in the Father's ability to see things that I can't see as a human, he found his rest. And in finding rest, he was able to rise from prayer and then to move forward with a joy set before him and a lot of difficult things still ahead. But that's what he did, and that's what he was telling them to do, and that's what he keeps encouraging us to do. Rest in his love. That's why we sang that song earlier today. Return to your rest, O my soul. Return to your Father. Know that if you can't conceive it, his will is more wonderful than you can conceive of. So just rest there. Let it go. Give it over to him. Rest in his love. And Jesus rose from prayer because he rested there in the Father's will. Pray as he prayed. That's the way of escape. And then, of course, do as he did. Like we've seen over the last few weeks. Don't focus on the failings of others. They will fail you. Don't focus on some Judas in your life, someone that, oh man, how could you do this to me? Don't focus on the kisses of an enemy, because it's just deception. And ultimately, no flesh and blood is the enemy. Don't focus there on the failings of others. Peter, James, and John, after all I've done for you, you can't even stay awake. What's wrong with you guys? We know what's wrong. Even when the Spirit's willing, the flesh is weak. And so, resting in the Father. I'm not going to focus on your failures. I'm not going to sit there and waste time worrying about all that. I'm going to, like Jesus, God help me, to pray as he prayed, to rest where he rested, to rise as he rose, to rise from prayer, to then sheathe the sword and say, I don't need that, put that one away, and then to heal wherever I can heal. If it would have been Judas, he would have healed Judas. He would have healed Peter better if Peter would have listened better. Would have protected him more if Peter would have listened to his words of warning. Where he could heal, where he said, let me at least do this, there was that ear lying there from a high priest slave, and he could do that. Let me do that. But always, that's the way to move beyond the wounding, to heal where you can heal, and to do what you can do. And that's the way that he left the garden. And that's the way we get out. Though he went out handcuffed, he was completely freed. No one took him prisoner. He went through some terrible stuff still ahead, but he had a lamp. He had a joy set before him. He knew where he was going. He knew what would be accomplished. And he walked in that light all the rest of the way through the chapters and the hours that would follow. That's where he went. Man, that's the way I want to go. Because too often I get stuck in that Gethsemane. I get stuck in that olive pressure place, that thing where I want to follow Jesus. And his last words are given then to those who could have followed but wouldn't. Because as much as he would want to take us all, everyone, I don't care who you are, even if you're a Judas, as much as he would want to take you out of loneliness and darkness and despair, not all want to get out. Not all will follow, because not all want to follow. And that's the last words. That's the last thing he said there in verse 52. Jesus said to the religious leaders, he said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and the elders who had come against him. See, he never came against them, but they came against him. And he asked them a pointed question. He said, have you come out with swords and clubs as against a robber? While I was with you daily in the temple, you wouldn't lay hands on me. You wouldn't touch me. You wouldn't take hold of me. You wouldn't enter into what I had. No, never there. While I was with you daily in the daylight, in the temple, in the Father's house, you didn't lay hands on me. But this hour and this power of darkness belongs to you. This is yours. This hour, this power of darkness, this Gethsemane, this hour and power of darkness, it belongs to you. Wow. That's a terrible belonging. This belongs to you. This is really yours. And why is it theirs? Is it because the Lord just threw a thunderbolt of darkness and despair on them? He doesn't work that way. The darkness, the hour, the power of darkness belonged to them because that's what they wanted. We want the dark. And even if it only lasts an hour, there's no place we'd rather be. We want it that way. And that's how sad that some people still do. If you don't want the darkness, I got good news for you. The light has come. You don't have to stay there. If you don't like the pressure place, if you don't like the Gethsemane, if you don't like the isolation and the loneliness and all of that, you don't have to stay there. But sadly, that's the fact. And Jesus lovingly tries to awaken them to the fact. This is what you want. This belongs to you. I'm going to remind you of the words that John gives us. You'll remember them as soon as I start to read them. But it's there that Jesus talks about why they would want that, why they were looking for that, why this belonged to them. Jesus said, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. This is in John 3, and he's talking about that stick, that pole, and a snake put on it, and all of that's a picture of the cross. Just as Moses did that, and everyone who looked, even from afar, they were healed, he says that's the way the Son of Man on the cross is going to be lifted up. So everyone, anyone, everywhere, just look. You don't even have to go and touch it. You don't have to crawl on your knees. Just look and believe, and you'll be healed. So the Son of Man must be lifted up on the cross, that whoever believes may in him have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but he sent him that the world should be saved through him. He who believes in him is not judged. He who does not believe has been judged already, because he hasn't believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the judgment. The judgment is this, that the light has come into the world, but men loved the darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone who does evil hates the light and doesn't come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed as being evil. And so Jesus says, look, I have come as the light, and anyone who wants healing, anyone who wants light, anyone who wants out can find it. But if you want to stay in the darkness, if you love the darkness, if the darkness does something for you in keeping you hid, in keeping your behavior somehow unseen, then that's the sad thing. The tree of life, the cross of Jesus, it is the light of the world. It's the light, and when you come to the cross, when you come to Jesus, you come to the light. And it's not a flattering light. It doesn't tell you what you want to be told. It tells you the way it is. And the truth will set you free. But when you come into the light of the cross of Jesus, when you see yourself as you really are, though it's not a flattering light, it's not some Hollywood star shot sort of deal, it's an honest light. And you'll find that whatever you see, no matter how flawed, no matter how deformed, no matter how ugly, no matter how self-imposed all of the ugliness might be, you'll find in the light of his cross there's healing. You'll find that in that light there is no judgment. No judgment at all. The judgment resides in the darkness. That's the judgment. Not thrown into the darkness, but you just won't come out. And because you won't come out, because you won't be healed, you won't be healed. But again, his love would heal all. And so these religious leaders, they were staying in the darkness. It belonged to them because they liked it that way. They wanted it that way. And when Jesus asks questions, whether it's of Judas or whether it's of them or whether it's of you and I, it's not, if you get the answer, you'll get into heaven. It's that, look, if you'll think about it, you may get yourself out of the self-imposed hell. He asks questions. Unconditional love asks us questions so we'd question ourselves, doubt ourselves, make us wonder, what in the world am I doing to myself? Why don't I follow him? Why don't I trust him? Why don't I know that he loves me? And so he's asking these religious leaders. He puts this question to them. What was their job? What was the job, what was the job description for a religious leader? For them, if you'd asked them, they would have said, well, our job is to protect the work of God, protect the people of God, protect the flock of God. They saw themselves as shepherds, as leaders in a certain sense. And they believed, this is really weird, but they actually believed that in killing Jesus, they were protecting the people. You see that all through. I'm not saying they really, really, really believed it. I'm just saying they believed it enough that they believed it. In other words, they could satisfy their own conscience enough to keep on going. But if they questioned their answers, they would find deeper down, no, there's something uglier at work. But who wants to see ugly? I don't even want to go there. I just want to believe I'm doing this for the people. And that's what they thought. They believed that he's a blasphemer. He's saying things. He couldn't be the Messiah. He's wrong. He's misleading them. He's going to take them astray. They believed that somehow if they didn't stop him, he was going to bring all kinds of problems on the flock of God, on the people of God, bring the Romans down and crush the work that they were doing. So in their self-deceptive ways, they kept telling themselves, this isn't about us. This is for God. This is for the people of God. And that's how, it's crazy. But the Lord, our healer, questions our craziness and says, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Judas, who are you really betraying? Who are you really handing over to the enemy? Who's getting hurt worse by what you're doing? Can you see? Can you know that I wasn't giving you the kiss of an enemy when I gave you that little sop of bread at the table? That was a real kiss. I really love you. I really care for you. And it's no different for these religious leaders. He says, what do you want? Why do you love darkness? Why are you hiding? But once it's got a grip on yourself, once you got all these excuses, these self-righteous reasons why you do what you do, no matter how cruel you are to others, wow, this is for the kingdom of God. This is for the protection of God's people. Man, it's crazy how crazy we can be. And so, in that light, they let me just let you in on a little council. John lets us in on this, a council of the Pharisees that was being held just after what's his name? Lazarus. How could I forget Lazarus? The friend of Jesus, Lazarus, was raised from the dead. And no sooner did that happen that the religious leaders saw there's so many people following Jesus, we got to not only kill Lazarus again, but we got to kill the guy that keeps bringing him back. And so they're having this little council in John chapter 11, and it says that they're saying, what are we doing? This man is performing so many signs. If we let him go on like this, everybody is going to believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place, that's the temple, the Father's house, our place, take away our place and our nation. Oh, God's nation, a little honesty here, it's our nation. We're going to lose it all. Our place, our nation, if we don't stop this guy, but it's a Freudian slip. I don't think they know what they're saying. But they're being honest. This is our place, our nation. But in their minds, no, it's God's place, it's God's nation. We got to stop this man. And then a certain one of them, he's going to come up in our reading a little bit later, in the weeks ahead, Caiaphas, the high priest. A certain one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, he said to them, you know nothing at all, which is basically the way you stop a council of religious guys. You just tell them, none of you know anything at all. I know it all. And he said, you don't take into account that it's expedient for you that one man should die for the people rather than the whole nation should perish. Now, this he didn't say. This is John telling us this. The Caiaphas didn't say this on his own initiative, but because he was the high priest that year, he accidentally prophesied. There actually came something true out of his mouth. He was saying something sinister, something like a mafia boss would say. It's expedient that the guy dies. But in fact, because he was the high priest, he was actually saying, for the good of the whole nation, the one man must die. He didn't say this on his own initiative. Being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not just for the nation of the Jews, but that he might gather together all of God's children who are scattered abroad to bring them all into one. And so on that day, they planned together to kill him. So those were the kind of things they were thinking. Those were the kind of things that they were saying. Jesus, of course, knew all of that. And as they're saying all of this, he questions them. He says, have you come out here with swords and clubs as against a robber? Here they were with lanterns and lights. It's a full moon, and they've got a betrayer helping them. But they got all the lamps and the lights, and they've got the swords, and they got the weapons. And Jesus says, have I been a thief? Do I take what doesn't belong to me? Have I ever been one who would take? The enemy, of course, is the one who steals and kills and destroys. These were the guys who, in fact, were the robbers, but they didn't see themselves. And Jesus says, why the weapons? I'm the one that says, turn the other cheek. Why the weapons? Why the costumes? It's not Halloween. Who do you think you are? How bold, how brave do you think you are? I went out trick-or-treating a couple of weeks ago with my youngest grandkids. I went out dressed like the old man. I'm good at that. And I went out, and the little boy, little 2-year-old, he was a pirate. And he had all the pirate stuff on, and the patch never stayed over the eye. It kind of always fell down, And he had the little sword, and now he's scared of the dark because he's a little kid. He's just a little cutie pie. But he's got the pirate, and taught him how to say "arg," and he'd go up to the doors and scared of the dark, but standing in the light of the porch, he'd say, do your pirate call, and "arg," and everyone, oh, they're all scared. But the fact is, no one's scared. He's afraid of the dark, but he's got the costume and he's got the weapon. And in many ways, these guys, who do you think you're fooling? You're wearing the costumes, you got the weapons, you think you're coming against the robber, but we read earlier in Luke 22, verse 2, that the chief priests and scribes were seeking how they might put him to death because they were afraid of the people. Here we are, the defenders of the people, going to arrest Jesus. You're afraid of the people. That's why you never did it in the daylight. You had to find a dark place because you're scared. You had to come out here and put on the costumes as though you're brave soldiers and carry the weapons as though I was the one who was the robber. And the ultimate question that God help us maybe to apply to ourselves once in a while, who do you think you're fooling? If you suspect that you're something less than you are, maybe you are a lot less than you are. But you know what? Coming to the light is nothing to fear. Come to the light and you can be fixed. Come to the light and admit it. I'm scared. Come to the light and say, look, there's something about me that needs help and healing. And of course he'll help you. And of course he'll heal you. But you see, they liked the darkness. And they wouldn't do anything during the day. Who do you think you're fooling? He said, while I was with you daily, in the daylight, every day, while I was with you in the temple, in the Father's house, you wouldn't touch me. You wouldn't lay hands on me. There, when I was at home in the Father's house, you weren't at home. There in the daylight where I was comfortable, you weren't comfortable. There in that place, you didn't belong. You think you're defending it, but you wouldn't take my teaching in and receive my help. I would have given it to you as gladly as anyone else. But you didn't want the Father's house and you didn't want the daylight. They didn't belong to you because you didn't want them. That's your choice. But here's what you want. This hour and this power of darkness, that belongs to you. That's your choice. Now, as terrible as those words are regarding them, I find them very comforting for me. Because sometimes I have a really hard time with the darkness. I can put on my pirate costume and I can wave a sword, but sometimes the darkness gets to me. Sometimes when it lasts a long time, I don't know about you. I know I'm not the only one, because I talk to other people who feel the same way. I don't think I would do really good in Alaska. I just don't, given a choice, I don't think I want to have darkness. I find it a lot of times difficult when we have as many hours of darkness as we do right now. I like the light. And in my mind, there's a lot of dark things about the darkness. Not scared of, ghosts in the night, but more just the troubles that seem to last so long in the darkness. And when I look forward to the winter solstice, when I look forward to Christmas, when I look forward to the fact that we're going the other direction, I think of springtime, and I think of things much more than just the sun in the sky. I think of spiritual things and eternal things. And for me, I recall times, I don't know if it's worse in the winter, but it seems like some of the sicknesses, the chronic sicknesses, and believe me, I haven't been through that much. Don't feel sorry for me. I feel sorry enough for myself. But through the little things that I've gone through, when they've lasted a long time, my mind goes back, and it seems like they were always in the dark seasons of life. And I can remember pacing back and forth, or just sitting there because I can't pace. I'm in too much pain to pace in the darkness, and the darkness, and the darkness, and I keep going on. And if I talk like this much longer, I'm going to depress myself. I really can. I can bring anxiety upon me just thinking about those times in the darkness. And I can't get my breath. And all of that, if you can relate, I can relate. But what I've found is, though it doesn't seem this way, I have found that the darkness cannot pull me in and pull me down under. I say that by faith because it feels like the darkness can just, like I said, I can just talk about it, and next thing you know, I'm in it. But the truth is, the darkness doesn't pull me in. I pull the darkness in. It's my choice. And I got to repent of that. I got to say, you know what? I don't want that anymore. I can take a dark hour, just an hour of darkness that's a week away, and I can worry about that hour for a whole week. And what would have been an hour of darkness is a week of darkness because I sucked it in. I pulled it down upon me, and I'm dealing with darkness I haven't even got to yet. And maybe it might be that darkness I worried about won't even happen. Sometimes that happens. Isn't that disappointing? There I was, worried, going through darkness for a week, for a month, and the hour never even came. And so knowing that and returning to my rest, going back to my Father, and say, Lord, your will is not darkness, for in you there's no darkness at all. Your will is that I would rest in you and believe that whatever comes, we're going to go through this, and we'll get through it on the other side, and even somehow you'll work all things together for good. Believing in the Father and knowing that it's only an hour of darkness. It may seem like forever, but it's just an hour of darkness. That is, it won't be long. And I tell myself, this is more than a mantra. This isn't meaningless words, but it's something I say over and over and over again. This won't be long because I don't belong. I don't belong here. I don't belong to the darkness. I don't belong in the darkness, so I will not be long here because I don't belong here. This isn't what I want. It's not what the Father wants. I'll get through it because you know what? I don't like it. I don't love it. I don't want to stay here. If there's something I've got to hide and that's my problem, then bring me to the light as quick as possible because there's nothing that my Father won't forgive. There's nothing that he won't heal. But I hate the darkness and I want out. It's just an hour of darkness. It can't be long because you don't belong. Unless, of course, you like it and want it. And that's sad. It's an hour of darkness and it's a power of darkness. And if you think about that for a second, the power of darkness is no power at all. It's a non-power. What happens when the power goes out? It's dark. That's all it is. And the only power that darkness has is to keep you in the dark. If we can fool you, if we can keep you in the dark, if we can keep you focused on a big nothing, then you're stuck there. That's why the truth will set you free. The light will tell you that, you know what? You don't have to worry about it. You're going through a time of nothing. You're going through an hour of darkness, but you know what? It's nothing. And you'll get through it because you got a friend, you've got a Father, you've got a family. So many things are working for you and you just can't see them right now. You just can't see it because you're in the dark, but that's all right. I've always liked the little lyrics. You may think I'm strange, but you're only right, I am strange. But I've always really liked the lyrics that Ringo Starr sings in that song where he says, "What do you see when you turn out the lights?" I can't tell you, but I know it's mine. And I'll get by with a little help from my friends. You know, we got a lot of help from a lot of friends, and Jesus is the friend. But that question, what do you see when you turn out the light? I don't know, but it's mine. If the power goes out, if the lights go out in that room, all those things of comfort, all the pictures on the wall, all the things that belong to you, the things that made it cozy a minute before, and now you can't see them, you just can't see them. But it's still all yours. And we're told that all things belong to us in Christ, and everything is working for us because God is for us. And so I can't see those things, I can't connect with those comforts with my eyes anymore, but by faith I know that, you know, it's working for me. It's only an hour of darkness. It's just the power of darkness. And keeping that in mind, you'll get through it. Don't sleep from sorrow. Rise in prayer. Rest in your Father's love. When Adam and Eve failed, where did they go? They ran to the darkness. And who came to get them? Jesus. The Logos. He said, "Where are you? We're in the darkness. Why? You don't belong there. Get out of there. Come. I'll comfort you. I'll warm you. I'll clothe you. I'll lead you out." And he did. You don't belong here. Don't hide here. This isn't your place. Come on. Follow me. So leaving Gethsemane, moving forward. Yeah, there's problems ahead, but leaving that place of pressure. Bear in mind, we're all leaving. Gethsemane is behind us because it was for Jesus. He's the Son of Man. And Eden, paradise is ahead. Even as Jesus went to the cross, he knew paradise is ahead. All the family, all the people I'm redeeming. And even hours ahead, he would say to a thief on the cross beside him, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." I'm leaving the garden of pressure. I'm heading to the home, the place, the Father's house. That's what your Jesus said. That's what your Savior said. Listen to him. Trust him. Follow him. You belong to him if you want to. Let's turn to him with a couple of closing songs.
Who trust in the Lord.